Okay, well, welcome to this week's lab. We're going to be doing recrystallization. I just want to run over some of the equipment that we'll be using this week. We have our stir plate that has a heater. So on one side you will have the heat, and on the other side it will be a stir. And so you will be using both functions on this. We have a large 125 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask, two smaller 50 milliliter Erlenmeyer flasks, a graduated cylinder, a glass funnel, a Buchner funnel, an adapter, a watch glass, a small stir bar, a pipette bowl, spatula. These will be the main utensils that we will use this week.
We will begin this experiment by weighing out acetaldehyde with weighing paper on our scale. Notice that I do not have exactly 1.00. You may use a roundabout number. Just make sure that you write down the correct number in your notebook and on the worksheet.
The first step this week will be to add the acetaldehyde to our small Erlenmeyer flask. So the best way to do this is to take your filter paper and make it into a cone that you can then pour directly into your Erlenmeyer flask. I will put this to the side, and then I'll also take a water bottle or from the tap, and I'll measure out 30 milliliters of water to put into our 125 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask. So that's 10 milliliters. And this will be our stock solution for the remainder of this initial experiment. So we're going to be heating the water to a temperature that will be able to dissolve our acetaldehyde. This will then go onto our flask, and I will begin heating it at a higher rate, maybe at a 6 or a 7, until we start to get boiling. I'm also going to take my glass funnel and put that on top as well, because I want this to be heated. Okay, we are now at a boil on our water. I had it turned up pretty high. What we want to do is turn it down to a lower setting, maybe 4 or 5, to just have a minimal roll. I will then take a pipette and a pipette bulb, and then you insert them. You do not need to push the pipette bulb way down on top of the glass pipette, just at the very end so that it sticks on is fine. I didn't mention that we need to take our stir bar and add it into our acetaldehyde. At this point, what we can now do is start to think about adding the water solution to it. So I'm going to take my acetaldehyde solution and start adding water. And what I'm looking for, at this point in time, it's not going to be too hot. So for each draw up of a full pipette, I'm going to get about 1 milliliter of solution. Okay? And so that's around 3, 4, 5. And what I want to be doing is seeing if our acetaldehyde is completely being dissolved. And so also I want to take the stir plate and get that stirring so that we have complete dissolution of our solid. And so we're letting that stir, and you'll notice that there is a color to the solution suggesting that we have some impurity that we'll need to get rid of. And so what you need to do is, over time, look at this, add small amounts of water until we get a complete dissolution. I'm going to hold this up on the other side of the sash from me. So I hold it away in proper form to see what kind of dissolution. And what you might find is that the solid begins to oil out, and so the solid becomes an oil. And at that point you need to add more water to have it completely solubilized. So I'm about 7 or 8 milliliters now. Okay, so we've added enough water to make sure that most of the, if not all of the oil has gone away. What we want to do now is add charcoal or activated carbon to remove that pink impurity. So we don't want to add it directly to the boiling solution, so we're going to remove it from the heat plate for just a few seconds, maybe 10-20 seconds, and prepare a spatula tip full of the activated carbon. So with our spatula, we're going to take something about this much, just the top of the spatula, and we're going to add it. And so at this point in time, we can swirl it and then place it back on our heating plate just for a few, maybe another minute or so. I forgot to mention, as soon as we put this decolorizing charcoal back on, what we want to do is have a second flask ready to get hot. And so I'm going to take about 3 pipettefuls of hot water and put that inside of a second Erlenmeyer flask. And what I'm hoping to do is make this flask also hot, and so that what will have no problem in transferring over into. And so I'm also going to take my filter flask, or excuse me, my glass funnel, and then I'm also going to take a filter paper. And I'm going to fold that filter paper one time in half and a second time in half. And then you'll see that there will be able to have a slight cone that you can now put inside of that filter paper. And so we're going to let that sit for a few moments to let it boil. Okay, we're now ready to transfer our activated carbon solution into our receiving flask. You'll notice that I also had put on a watch glass on top, and this helps the vapors get up and make that a little bit hotter up on the filter paper, and so hopefully makes everything a little bit hotter. So just to confirm that everything's hot, what I'm going to do is also pipette maybe a couple milliliters on top of that filter paper and push it down so that it makes it a good seal between the filter paper and our glass funnel. Okay? So now what we're ready to transfer, this is going to be hot, and so one way to be able to transfer without hurting yourself is to take a paper towel and sort of wrap it around in such a way that you can have sort of a holder. And so now we want to pour that solution on top of our hot filter paper, and it's going to hopefully filter that solution. And so I filled up that filter paper all the way to the top, and so I'm going to allow that to filter down while also keeping my hot solution hot. And so there might be sometimes a sort of bubbling because there's not enough room for this gas to escape, so I'm going to sort of move this filter paper out of the way really fast, and so now it's not so tight of a seal around, so it allows it to filter down. So now most of the solvent has passed through the filter, so I'm going to add some of this solution. And so you might have a crystallization event occur in the filter. That's okay. What we're going to do in a minute is filter that or use hot water to wash that down. So what you'll notice is at the top we have the activated carbon, possibly the pink color, that's soaked up all this pink color. And you'll notice that everything that comes down now is clear and free of that colorant. The liquid has completely passed through the filter paper. There might, depending on how hot your filter paper was, there might be some residual solid there. So what you can do is either let it, what's called reflux, where you have the solvent boil, and it might be able to dissolve some. An alternative is to take hot water from our reservoir and wash those solids, redissolve them with this hot liquid that will we allow them to pass through that filter paper. Okay, and so now we're at a point where we can remove our funnel, and what we want to do is probably allow this to boil down just a little bit until we have a solution that will allow it to precipitate. A problem that you might face, this one is doing this right now, is there is a whole bunch of bubbles that's occurring here, and you don't want this to froth out of your flask. And so if it gets to a point where you see this moving really high up on your flask, you might want to quickly remove that flask and let it settle down at any point in time. This is also a problem if you happen to have solvent that is really, if you put the liquid level really high in your flask, you don't want it to be too high. And so we're going to allow this to boil down till it's maybe around 15 milliliters or less, and then we're going to set it to the side to crystallize. So I boiled down to around 10 milliliters of solvent. If you start to see a white precipitate, you know that you're already super saturated even at that hot temperature. I already had that a second ago, and what I did is I added just a couple more drops of hot solution back into that solvent, and now I'm ready to remove. And so now I remove it to the bench top, and we're going to allow it to cool.
So I just removed it from the plate, and you can start to see that there is, well, what we want to do is not touch it, but we start to see that there is some white precipitate starting to form as soon as I removed it from the heat.
Okay, I have now transferred, we have finished the recrystallization. Depending on the TA, what he says or he or she says for time, what we may need to do, instead of letting it cool to room temperature over a long time, which will take a while, we might want to just take it and submerge it in a bucket of ice. This will help crystallize it faster. However, this is not the optimal way to do it because we might trap impurities. But in this case, we're looking for time, shortened time, so that's important. So now you'll notice that we have these white crystals. Depending on how they crystallize, it might be stuck to the bottom or very rigid, so we might take a spatula and distribute them in this, make them free-flowing in the remaining solution. I now have a filter flask with a neoprene adapter that I put on top to interface between the filter flask and our Buchner funnel. The Buchner funnel will then go on top, and a perfectly fit filter paper will then go on top of that Buchner funnel. It's very important here that we have safety, careful around this flask. You don't want to break it, as well as Buchner funnel and this adapter that is hooked up to the vacuum. I also have water that is cooling in the ice that I'm going to be using to wash my crystals. Okay, so what will I do? I might take a little bit of water and wet the top of that filter paper, insert the vacuum, and begin the flow of vacuum. So at this point in time, we want to make sure that it's stable and it's not going to fall over and break everything. What I'll then do is swirl my crystals to make sure that they're free-flowing. One last time to wet that filter paper and then dump into the top. I will then take some cold water and use it to wash and scrape the remaining crystals and wash that filter cake, what's called the filter cake. And so I can wash a little bit of the filter crystals in this regard. Okay, we have pulled vacuum through this hose for around 20 minutes to complete the drying process. I went and pre-weighed my watch glass as a way to get a weight on this. And then also now I can scrape out the solid crystals that we have from our filter flask. And you can see that we have crystals, and if you have to, you can even remove the filter paper onto the desk and sort of scrape directly off of the filter paper onto your onto the weighing paper. And you'll notice that I even got some on the desk. It's okay. And then we can collect it onto our weighing glass, and then we can go and get our final weight of the product. Second filtration. So what we're going to do now, again, is as that solution filters through the filter paper, we're going to refill with the hot solvent, what you'll find is that there is some crystallization